Molds and bioterrorism. Well, a lot of people might not realize is that these things have been investigated for uses in bioterrorism ever since the 50s.
The Army, of course, is very interested in biological warfare weapons, and a book published by the Department of Defense, Chapter 34, the title of that chapter is Trichothecene mycotoxin, because, of course, it is alleged to have been used as a biological warfare weapon. Whether it has or not, I don't know, but the Army feels certainly that it's a dangerous enough compound that it needs to be studied.
Should we not be putting as much money into the effort to try and resolve this whole mold issue as we are into the effort to resolve any other bioterrorism issue?
Everybody's looking for the silver bullet, you know, the chemical they can spray on it to eradicate the mold problem.
You can't just paint over it because it'll go right through. You can't just kill the mold because a dead mold can be just as allergenic as a live mold.
I've seen solutions or attempted solutions that incorporate using some form of fragrance that smells more pleasant than the musty, moldy smell. And that's a Band-Aid approach, maybe even a dangerous Band-Aid approach. There still could be a pretty nasty problem in the space that you just now no longer can smell.
Just by ignoring mold, obviously the mold is not going to go away. The way to get rid of mold is by removal.
Remediation can be as simple as a little bit of tile cleaner and a sponge and wiping away a mildewy spot. To removing large amounts of the interior, finishes and even some of the structural products of a building.
The small projects can generally involve just cutting out a piece of drywall, removing it, and actually just throwing it in the trash. If you've got a more significant problem, your house is going to undergo what we call a containment. And the remediation contractors are going to come in suits and respirators and remove all of the mold-impacted material.
Part of the problem with doing it yourself is if you don't know what you're doing, you can cross-contaminate your entire house.
People need to understand that by the time mold becomes visible, you have millions, if not billions or trillions of spores.
The moment they start to disturb the building material, you have a problem. You've got a maintenance guy going in there, wiping off mold without taking any kind of precautions, and he's spreading the mold spores throughout the building.
It should not be treated in the slash and burn hack method.
The last thing you want to do is make more exposure for yourself as part of the fix and make the fix worse than the actual original problem.
If Joe the janitor is sent out by Larry landlord to do some mold remediation and he has an axe and he starts hacking into a wall, the tenant should say, hold on a second, stop, is this really the best way to go about it?
A remediation company is one that should have a track record in that area. This shouldn't be their first mold remediation they've ever done.
It seems like everybody and their brother now is jumping on the mold bandwagon. Because we're just exposing people to needless exposures to these organisms due to botched microbial remediation projects.
The stucco paper was not cleaned enough. I think that's a big deal right there. You can see a lot of discoloration, a lot of brown spots where mold is still growing.
You should ask them for references. The remediation contractor should be an independent party from the inspector.
See how the existing jobs are going. The homeowner should be getting multiple estimates and bids, and that way let the contractors tell you what sets them apart.
The first thing we do when we enter into a house is we're going to do an assessment, find out where the work needs to be performed. We're going to follow a written protocol. We will build our containment. This containment is a plastic barrier,
so there isn't transport of the fungi into an occupied space.
The containment barrier should be able to last for that entire period of time without failing.
You can go one better than that. Plastic is a fragile material, and if it's moved or torn, then you've got the same problem you have if the plastic's not there, that the mold can get out. So what you can do is you can put a little negative pressure in there.
Our containment areas are under negative pressure to make sure that we're able to trap mold spores.
If there's any breach in the barrier, the air is going to go from the outside to the inside rather than vice versa, which is what you want. You got to think about this for a minute. The organism that we're looking at reproduces by throwing its spores into the air, which means that if you disturb the mold, it's going to throw its spores into the air.
It makes a lot of spores, 10 to the 6th to 10 to the 9th. That's 1 million to 1 billion per square inch.
If they don't know how to remediate a building and get mold out of a building safely, then they can spread that mold everywhere in the building and sometimes make the building uninhabitable.
Think about the person who is inside there, who's working with all of this stuff.
All of this should be done under the proper type of personal safety for the workers.
full-face respirator, 2 or 3 layers of gloves, and 2 or 3 layers of Tyvek suits.
If somebody goes in and tries to remediate it and they don't know what they're doing, they can make themselves extremely sick.
People who have attempted to remediate mold on their own don't have the equipment. A specialized saw, which is attached to the heap of vacuum, we have to go at least 2 feet beyond any visible stains on a wall or on a floor. And we're going to begin the removal of the contaminated cabinetry or walls and place that into bags. The root structure of mold penetrates into wood. We have to sand it, wire brush it, scrub it very rigorously.
It's critical that upon completion of remediation, that what we call post-remediation sampling be performed again by the investigator.
What we're doing now is just setting up our gear to be able to take some airborne samples, both culture and spore trap type samples.
You can't look at it after the drywall's been put on and determine if all the mold's been removed from inside the wall.
One of the very real concerns is contents and materials within a contaminated environment.
Carpeting, items like this, upholstered furniture, you're not going to scrub those surfaces, adequately clean in most cases.
These mold spores will settle down within the matrix of that material, and then they may or may not come back up.
If you still have health effects, then you probably have not cleaned that material well enough.
In trying to start your life over again and start your health all over again, start fresh.
If you're doing mold remediation, it's pointless unless you have figured out why you have mold. In other words, what the water source is.
Fix the water problem. That's the underlying cause. There has to be a moisture problem that led to this fungal growth in your environment.
What we really have to focus on is much, much better design and construction practices that really control all of the moisture sources. Mold control is manageable if we simply use the techniques that we have and apply them at the earliest stages.
Insurance companies, they're backpedaling so fast, they're trying to make the argument that mold is not a health issue.
In Texas right now, if you file a claim, you run the risk of losing your insurance.
The State Department of Health Services is now developing the standards of exposure.